I'm Professor Sterling, the Director of the Black Studies Program, and welcome to our program this evening, African Voices at DACA. But I should say at DACA and more. All right?
Hi, Yasmin. Hi.
All right. So, I don't know if you guys have been following the roster of the Black Studies Program, but this is our third panel on immigration. The first one we did in September in conjunction with anthropology, and it was a huge panel. We did another one with Somi, the jazz singer, where I met Amaha, and that again was wonderful because what she wanted to do was to create all the linkages between the Harlem community and what's going on out in the world. So this one, of course, is to bring, it all together, to kind of bring us to kind of some kind of understandings of what the different African communities are going through, what can be done in terms of the different levels of intervention, and kind of like, forging some levels of solidarity across the board. When I was thinking about this, I was, just to be personal for a second, I know we're in a room probably of immigrants. Me being an immigrant myself, my journey was so different from many of the students now. My mother was recruited to come here. She was, a cadre of nurses in the Caribbean. And so they needed, workers. And so they gave her everything she needed. And then, of course, our family came along in terms of, in the way that they're calling now chain migration. Okay? Kind of the derogatory, implication of what that means. But I know that my mom's family and my coming later on, without that family, she couldn't have really survived. She was working like crazy. She was trying to make ends meet. She was trying to take care of her family on multiple levels. And so that community that she had with the family sustained her and helped to sustain me and helped to push me along in the direction that I needed to go. And I think that many of us who are kind of these legal immigrants tend to forget that because, that we have a privileged status and that there's so many people that need help on another level. And so I'm hoping that this panel will then open the doors to, kind of communicating some of the things that are available to help everyone. So, with pleasure, I'm only going to introduce our moderator, and our moderator will introduce our panelists, okay? And I did not bring my glasses, Nika, okay?
It's not mine.
So it's going to be really hard for me to see this, okay? So, Professor Adeyinka Akinsulera-Smith, she's a PhD, and I can't make out the other initials, but she's a licensed psychologist, okay, who is originally from Sierra Leone. She is a tenured associate professor in the Department of Psychology at the City College of New York. She is also a co-founder of Nawiyon. Okay, I can't read it, that's why.
That's okay. They can read.
Like, so much like Sierra Leonean Pasha. So, yeah.
Connections.
Exactly, okay? All right, a nonprofit organization created to proactively, respond to war, survivors, okay, from the African diaspora. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right? She has cared for forced migrants, as well as survivors of torture, armed conflict, and human rights abuses from around the world at Bellevue and NYU, program for survivors of trauma since 1999. Wow.
They've been around for a minute.
Wow. That's a strong lady to be able to do that, okay, for all these years, okay? So I want to welcome you all and open the floor and sit back there.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by thanking Black Studies for having us and Professor Cheryl Sterling for inviting us to be with you. I'm just going to start with a few comments, have our panelists make comments about who they are and what they're doing and what they've done, throw in some questions, and then I really want to open it up to us all for a multi-log. But to start, I just want to make it clear that I am very proud to say, I come from a shithole African country, okay? That's who we are. Okay? I'm very proud. And I want to throw down some facts as we talk about these shithole countries that send people to us for good or bad reasons. But just to throw out some facts about African immigrants who are here in the US. The sub-Saharan African population roughly doubled every decade between 1980 and 2010 and increased by 29% over the following 5 years. Since 2015, 1.7 million sub-Saharan Africans lived in the US, roughly 9% of the immigrant population. In our New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, we have approximately 175,000 immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa. We are coming for good reasons, for sad reasons. We are here. And the numbers that I'm giving you are those who are documented, who are and not those who are undocumented. So we're here, we're here, we're here. Now, we're in the middle of this dialogue that's going on. Or actually, no, let me reframe that. I feel as if we're on the side. Because there's a lot of talk about DACA, immigration, send them back, why are they coming here? But we really haven't been featured that heavily. Where are our voices? What are we doing? How are we responding? Why are we so quiet? So before I say any more and ask any more questions, what I'd like to do is have my two co-panelists tell you a little bit about who they are, what they've been doing, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, let Amaha start.
Amaha?
Yeah,
No,
sure.
go ahead, Amaha. Thank you.
All right, good evening. My name is Amaha Casa. I am the founder and executive director of ACT, African Communities Together. We are an organization of immigrants from Africa and their families here in New York, and then we also have a chapter in the DC metro area. And I started the organization 5 years ago after a career in community organizing, labor union organizing, nonprofits, and I was involved with a lot of advocacy, including on immigration issues. I was part of some of the national mobilizations for immigration reform, going all the way back to 2001. And I started looking around at some of these tables discussing immigration policy and saying, you know, where are the Black immigrant organizations? Where are the African immigrant organizations? Where are the organizations working with families like mine? I'm first generation. I was born in Ethiopia. My family fled shortly after the Civil War, after a number of my family members were killed by the Derg regime, and so came here, you know, as a refugee, in effect, although not as a recognized refugee. You know, I started to ask myself the question and looking for somebody to do that, and at a certain point, it became clear that that I was all, you know, that somebody was going to be me. People were like, great idea, go do that. I guess, you know, it's a be careful what you wish for thing when I was like, somebody needs to be helping families like mine. Now that I've started the organization and along the way I got a law degree and we're doing immigration law, I'm actually helping my own family an extraordinary amount. Like, you know, like they never understood what I did, but I'm now doing immigration cases for half my relatives and their friends and family. So be careful what you wish for. So what we do as an organization, 3 basic things informed by, you know, learning from other organizations, the civil rights movement, labor unions, the history of immigrant mutual aid organizations in this country that people have organized for generation after generation, immigrants from Russia, Ireland, China, all over the world. One is we help people meet their immediate needs, direct service. A lot of that is immigration legal service, but we also end up helping people with small business lease assistance, housing, you know, was just talking with Yinka about the ongoing need for better counseling and support services in our community. So we end up meeting a lot of those immediate needs. But at our heart, we're a community organizing group, and so when people come to us for services, we want to make them, help them transition from being clients to being members. And we have monthly membership meetings here in Harlem on 127th and Lenox, where we talk about issues in the community. We do a lot of civic education, talk about campaigns, talk about, at our last meeting, we took a vote on what our position was on one of the federal immigration bills. And then we do campaigns. And some of that is federal work, so we've been involved with federal immigration policy, and some of it is local work. So last year, we led a campaign to expand the City of New York's language access policy, which up until last year covered 6 languages, Chinese, Korean, Bengali, Spanish, Russian, and Haitian Creole. And you'll notice it doesn't include French, Arabic, or any of the languages of the African continent. So we were able, through advocacy, to fight for a bill that added French and Arabic, as well as strengthening the systems for when somebody comes in and goes to HRA or applies to their local office for assistance, that they will get services in their native language. So that's an example of local work. We've also certainly been involved with a lot of the issues affecting the broader immigrant community, including the immigrant ban, the Muslim ban, the refugee ban, and the various assaults by the Trump administration on immigrants, black immigrants, African immigrants, Muslim immigrants, on everybody. It's worth remembering that one of the, Trump's final acts before the November election was to fly to Minnesota and personally, in a state that was expected to go blue, personally refer to Somali immigrants as a threat that had been allowed to grow unchecked in the state of Minnesota. So that really set the tone for this administration. So what I want to do just very briefly is sketch out a little bit of the DACA and more that Dr. Sterling was laying out. So I think there's a little bit of knowledge around the DACA issue just because there's been such incredible organizing amongst undocumented youth. There's been a very powerful movement. There's been a narrative, which for good or for bad, has kind of captured people's attention around the Dreamers. And it's an important struggle. There's something like 800,000 young people and adults with DACA who stand to lose all immigration status if nothing changes. So that's a very important battle. I want to just briefly point to another couple of key battles and how they specifically affect black immigrants and African immigrants. So the numbers of actual black DACA recipients, DACA eligible folks, are not that huge. It's not a relatively low percentage of black immigrants qualify for the program, having to do with how people came or when they came or how old they were when they came. It's still, I think I saw an estimate that it was maybe 40,000 Africans and probably a slightly larger number of Afro-Caribbeans who would qualify for DACA. So still a significant community, but compared to the impacts it's going to have within Latinx communities and so forth, it's smaller. Another issue that's going to have huge impacts on our community and is being debated as we speak. There was Senator Cardin was doing a colloquy on the Senate floor on this issue, is TPS, or temporary protected status. TPS is a form of humanitarian immigration relief that says it's dangerous for this person to be returned to their country of origin because of humanitarian issues, whether that's the earthquake in Nepal, the hurricane in Haiti, the Ebola epidemic in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, civil war, et cetera. That's an issue that's going to affect 50,000 Haitians, including a whole lot of people right here in the New York City metro area, as well as in other parts of the country. And then smaller populations from Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, who lost their TPS, unfortunately, last year under the Obama administration and under Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson, whose name was, first name Jay was taken from a Liberian chief. So I think it's personally offensive that he ended TPS for Liberia and Guinea and Sierra Leone, and as well as Somalia and Sudan. So that's a key issue and a key battle affecting black immigrant communities. Another that maybe doesn't get the same attention is the refugee ban. 40% of resettled refugees over the last decade came from the African continent. So the refugee ban is in certain ways an African ban, in large measure an African ban. And we've seen under this administration the number of resettled refugees drop in half. So the impact is really stark, and it's affecting people right now who are overseas, have been promised admission to the US, or who are waiting for their family members to reunite with them, and are basically stuck in limbo because this administration has decided to turn its back on the commitment to humanitarian immigration, on the promise of never again, that was made after World War II, that we would repatriate people to countries where they might face death. So that's a key battle. The Muslim ban, half of the countries that were included in the Muslim ban were African countries. I think when people hear Muslim ban, a lot of times they're not, envisioning African Muslims. They're envisioning Arab or South Asian Muslims. But as a lot of people in this room probably know, a significant portion probably the majority of African immigrants, certainly in the New York City metro area, are Muslim. And experience Islamophobia, post 9/11 experienced surveillance by NYPD and by federal agencies. So Islamophobia is a black issue. Another humanitarian issue, which I think is really below the waterline, but is really important, are attacks on asylum. So asylum, as refugee resettlement, you're overseas, you say I'm a refugee, and the State Department essentially admits you as a fully recognized a refugee into this country, and you have your papers essentially before you arrive. Asylum, you're within the US borders, or you show up at the US border and you say, please don't return me to my country of origin because it would be, I don't have a country of origin because it would be unsafe for me. So sometimes people will come on a visitor visa, apply for asylum. And we see a lot of asylum applications coming from African communities in New York and in DC. And it's for a range of reasons, right? Sometimes it's because people are political dissidents, which I think is the most common reason. Sometimes it's because people are religious minorities who are persecuted. We see a lot of cases affecting women and related to gender-based violence. So female genital mutilation is a huge issue, right? Women who've survived it and don't want their child to have the same experience. Forced marriage, child marriage, domestic violence, especially when the perpetrator is a man in a position of power and the state is unable to protect them. LGBT issues, right? We saw an influx of folks from countries like Nigeria and Uganda after they implemented repressive anti-LGBT legislation. So it's a big issue for our community. My organization does something like 300 immigration cases per year here in New York, and a big percentage of those are immigration or other forms of humanitarian immigration. What the Trump administration is currently doing is they are fast-tracking cases where, asylum cases when they first come in, which sounds good because there can be actually a long wait to have your asylum case heard. But the reason to do it is to issue kind of quick and dirty denials and to speed people on a process of removal. They're also pressuring the independent judges who make the final decision on asylum to make fewer to approve fewer asylum cases. They made publicly made statements that immigration lawyers, dirty immigration lawyers was their phrase, are teaching their clients magic words that they're supposed to say at their hearing in order to get asylum. And I'm an immigration lawyer. I took a shower this morning, and there are no magic words, right? This is a fantasy, like a lot of the racialized fantasies of this administration. So that's an issue that we need to fight. The other issue that we need to fight, and we've been working on this locally as well as nationally, is extended detention of asylum applicants. We're now seeing cases where people who are not detained go to their asylum interview and they are detained at their asylum interview, which really cuts off their access to counsel, makes it really difficult to prepare their case, and is just dehumanizing and dispiriting for people who are often survivors of trauma. Very last issue, and then I'll pass the mic. The diversity visa program. So the diversity visa program was implemented to create a pathway to come to this country for people who maybe didn't have family who could apply for them or employment. It was originally passed by our own Senator, Chuck Schumer. It's been hugely beneficial to African immigrant communities, although it was really passed to help the Irish immigrants of New York City. But currently, about 20,000 of the 50,000 visas that are issued through the diversity visa program per year go to Africa. About 15,000 of those to sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a really important program for people who may not have that fast-track connection to be admitted to the United States. And just as they did when comprehensive immigration reform was last on the table, unfortunately, the Democrats are looking to bargain this program away in exchange for DACA or some other form of immigration relief, including Senator Schumer, one of the authors of the program. This program has admitted over 1 million people. Unfortunately, in the last year, one of those 1 million committed an act of terrorism in downtown New York. You may have heard, the loss of life was relatively minor, so it was there and gone from the news pretty quickly. But immediately the Republican Party sort of held a press conference to say, we're giving away green cards willy-nilly. They seized on the fact that while you are screened, you are vetted for the program, there are more applicants than can benefit from it, and so there's a lottery to determine who gets those very few limited slots. And made it sound as like it's a random process where they're standing out in corners in, Lagos and Dakar handing out green cards, right? Which is not at all the way the program works. I guess to sum up what are some of the key things that we think we need to do. We need to help protect our communities. We're doing immigration legal services. We, as an organization, African Communities Together, we've also formed something that's called the Community Guardians Network, which is African community leaders who've been trained and prepared to respond to raids, mass detentions, mass deportations, hate crimes, and so we're helping build that rapid response. We need to resist things like the Muslim ban, the refugee ban. We need to be in the streets fighting those. And we need to fight the right, but we also need to pressure the people who claim to represent us in the Democratic Party, Senator Schumer, who sometimes see our issues as optional. And so that's the challenge that I think lies before us. I think all the folks here and a lot of the folks here are engaged with those challenges in some way. And I look forward to being in conversation about how we move them forward.
So I'm going to pass over to Yasmin.
Thank you, Amaha, because you just did all the work, so I don't have to do any of that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Yasmin Yonis. I am a organizing fellow at the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, BAJI. It's headquartered in Brooklyn, in Bushwick, and I am a Master's Divinity student at Union Theological Seminary, right across from Columbia, down the street. So I just got out of class just like you guys. I just want to start with just acknowledging the fact that this is a very terrifying time for a lot of us. And that also it's been terrifying for a long time, that it didn't start with Trump, and I know you guys all know that, but I like to see this as probably the most honest president we've had in a really long time. I try to look at the good part. This is the most honest, you can call him a lot of things, but he's very honest when it comes to these issues. We know where we stand. We know how they look at us. And this is something that was happening under Obama, but what we had is blackness used in the service of empire. We had not just an African brother, supposedly, who was deporting us. He was the deporter in chief. He deported more people than any other president before him, right? He was dropping bombs in various African countries, including my own. I'm Somali. He expanded U.S. military like no one else has ever on the continent. He's done a lot of things. He's continued the increased funding of policing. And I want to add to the conversation in terms of these issues that, what we're here to talk about is how immigration is a black issue. And you guys all know that. These are not just policy updates. This is your lives. So even if you're a naturalized citizen like I am, or if you have DACA, you do not just come here by yourself. You don't live in a silo. The people we love are also undocumented, Someone I love, their mother is undocumented, they have DACA, and then their sister is a naturalized citizen. And we have mixed status families. This is all very normal. I've had a cousin have deportation, proceedings against him, and I have loved ones who have DACA, and it is scary. So I just want to acknowledge that. And I want to be, it says here about DACA, I want to say something about DACA. DACA is very important. Some of you guys may have DACA. I've seen how it changes lives. It allows you to go to work. It allows you to get a driver license. Well, you guys are in New York. I don't know if y'all drive, but other places they drive. But it allows you to be able to get up every day and go to school and take care of your family and empower you to not be as terrified every day. And I've seen how it lifts families out of poverty. It just makes it a little more bearable. But also that we should be careful when we talk about DACA, and realize how the reason that we are not necessarily the face of the larger immigration narrative, it's not just a numbers issue, because there is a good number of us, but the narrative is very problematic in a sense of DACA and these other people are good immigrants. They're not thugs. They're not criminals. They went to school. They pay their taxes. They're not it's families, not felons. But felons have families. And people in all families may have criminal charges against us because we're black, and we're black in America, a country founded on the forced enslavement of African people, right? And we understand that ICE is very much like the police, which is descended from the fact that slave catchers. We understand that immigration detention centers are really prisons, in which under the 13th Amendment says that slavery is abolished except as a punishment as a crime, right? And so when you jump the turnstile because you don't have $2.75 each way every day, right? And 70% of the people arrested for that or fined are black, you're targeted because you're black. You're poor significantly due to the fact that you're black and other parts of the system. And what happens is that can trigger deportation. You didn't have $2.75. That is not a crime. It is not a crime, right? Lots of things are not crimes, but that definitely is not a crime. And so what happens is that now you're in deportation proceedings, possibly, that your family can lose Section 8 or other subsidized housing, right? This is terrifying. This is scary. I didn't go into who I am or what I was doing before, but I was a senior associate at Human Rights Watch before this on foreign policy. lobbying the Obama administration on his foreign policy. So that's why I know a lot about him. I've become very intimate, and it was really, to become aware of this country and how violent it is. I call it kind of like the mourning process, the grief, the stages of grief. It's not linear, but there's like denial, and there's anger, and there's despair once you realize how hungry and how violent and bloody this monster is, right? It's easier to believe that this is like American dream is a reality, but immigration being a Black issue, we need to understand that we're here, not as the first ones, we're here continuing a 400-year tradition of Blackness in this country, right? And then that should be an empowering thing also. I don't want it to come through as like, that there's been people here who've created all these things with us while we were on the continent. They were here, and that we're here together. And so that's what Baji does. Baji was started in 2006, founded by African Americans and Black immigrants from Africa, but also from Latin America, so Afro-Latinos from the Caribbean, and various other places that Black people come from. And we work together because this is an issue that affects all of us. So when they talk about funding the wall, which, by the way, the southern border with Mexico at the moment, we are seeing numbers we've never seen before in terms of Black immigrants coming through the Mexican border. I didn't realize this until several years ago when I got a call from this Somali uncle who just kept calling me, you have to put like $5 in. It's such a scam to talk to someone in prison. And he tells me that he took his passport. He went to Kenya, then he went to South Africa. He ate his own passport. And he got to Brazil, and he hitchhiked, slept, from Brazil. We understand, Brazil's all the way, which is actually the second largest Black country in the world, and he went all the way from Brazil through South America to Central America, through Mexico, and gave himself up at the Mexican border. And now he was in prison in Pennsylvania. But when they talk about funding the war, and they talk about sending these people back to where they came from, this is a Black issue, even if you're not an immigrant. Because what happens is when they fund immigration, detention, immigration policing, what they're funding is police. They're gonna fund police. What they're doing is creating more prisons, right? Which could be easily turned into non-immigrant prisons, right? But and recently we had a African-American brother who was murdered by ICE, which is the immigration policing, right? And so this is a Black issue. The narrative of the good immigrant and the Black immigrant is a problem, like I had mentioned before, because what it does is pit us against each other. It dehumanizes. It reinforces this prison system that we have in place. Because that means a lot of my family are not good people, right? Because they've been arrested for smoking weed. Or maybe they're unemployed at the moment. Because it's very difficult to find a job as a Black person, no matter how many degrees you have. And we know that. A lot of our family members are driving taxis with PhDs from back home, right? And so I want us to be really careful when we talk about these narratives about who is deserving, who is not. We all are deserving. There's enough room for all of us. And so what you get is with DACA, what they saw was an opportunity for some people, for 800,000 people to get DACA. And they should, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but what that allowed was further criminalization of the rest of the immigrants, right? So my friend, he gets DACA, but now his mom is at a greater risk for ICE to come into their home or her workplace and to raid them. I'm gonna be careful about time and wrap up soon, but I just wanted to say that we are working on this report looking at broken windows to bring it to New York. Broken windows, if you guys don't know, is the targeting of very small crimes. And I'm an abolitionist, I'm against the prison system. This whole idea of crimes is just barbaric. But this idea of small crimes, jumping the turnstile and not swiping in is the #1 offense, but there's a lot of other ones. I call them slave crimes because after emancipation, they lost all their workforce, right? Their free forced workforce. So they start criminalizing anything that black people were doing, sitting in front of their stoop, walking without a job, just the most absurd things. And this is what they're doing today in New York. So if you walk, you've seen those signs in the parks where it says, do not walk after sunset. That can get you fined or arrested. People have been fined or arrested in their own homes, in the lobbies of their apartment buildings, sitting in their stoops, just walking and being black. We all know that happens. And I'm sure you guys have instances, or their families have instances. But then if you're an immigrant, that triggers all these other issues, right? Like I was talking about deportation. So Baji, along with my old job, Human Rights Watch, we're working on this report because we want to make this a black issue, right? A black immigrant issue. So later on in the, after the panel, I would love to talk to anyone if you guys have had these experiences yourself or your family members or your community, or have anything that you want to tell us. Everything is confidential. No one's names will be used. Everybody will be protected. But I really want us to do this report and to do this in a holistic way that doesn't erase certain communities, and we realize the humanity of all of us, so we can work on changing these things. Thank you.
Thank you both for your comments. So one of the questions that I have for both of you is that we see all this going on. But when I think about the African community, I feel like it's quiet. Is it fear? Is it passivity? What is it that stops us from being more engaged or having our voices more vocal about these issues that you're both speaking to? So if you can each kind of comment on it.
I would say that there's almost 2 million of us, 2 million African immigrants in this country, and there's a lot of diversity, right? Geographically, ethnically. I was just recently in Minnesota, spending a lot of time with the Somali community there, and the Somali community in Minnesota, let me tell you, is anything but passive.
You never heard of no quiet Somalis.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So, I knew about Minnesota nice, but not like Minnesota militant. So I think there is some diversity. I think it's something that's on people's minds, right? Like you go to the association meetings, you go to the churches, you go to the mosques, and people are talking about these issues, and there is consciousness around these issues. I do think that there is a visitor mentality that affects a lot of African immigrant communities. The sense is, and I think a lot of it has to do with how many of us got here, right? For many of us, that visa to the US was like the golden ticket, right? And a lot of people who end up being able to make the migration, it's the oldest child in the family. It's from a relatively privileged background. In an African context, that's very relative, right? But somebody who may have had a chance to, get an education. We are one of the most educated ethnic groups in terms of educational attainment. African immigrants, people who've already, migrated from the village to the city, and the expectation is you're going to go. You're going to earn money, that you're going to send home. You're going to provide a pathway for your nieces and nephews to come here and get their education. And then you're going to take that and you're going to go home at a certain point, and you're going to build a house and you're going to go back home. It's not everybody's trajectory, right? Refugees are less likely to have that story, but it is a really common trajectory in our community. And I think you take that, and then you take the fact that we are excluded in so many parts of American life, one, because we're immigrants, and two, because we're black. So people might like to integrate, but they might like to, but people find out pretty quickly they're discriminated against the workplace, their views aren't represented in politics, they're sort of, looked down on in American society, and it's easier in a lot of ways to retreat mentally to the homeland, right? So a lot of people, you get in a cab with a West African cab driver, they're probably not listening to US news, they're probably listening to a program in Fulani about home, right? And it's natural that we have ties to home and love for home and want to know about home. But the biggest thing that we can do to develop our countries of origin, our continent of origin many times, is to fight right here, right? To build, to fight for a place, to influence US foreign policy, to fight for the resources that we need as a community that we can send home as well as moving ahead here. So I think it's a false choice that we have in our in our mind about what it means to sort of be African or be African and American.
Yeah, well, being a Somali may be a little biased, but my people are very, very vocal and forced to become grassroots organizers. I don't think a lot of people want to do this work. And I think it's because Somalis very much have been targeted on so many different levels. So not only you're a refugee, so you get politicized because the country you're brought to, usually it's because they're implicated in what's happening in your country. There's Somalis being targeted, right, by the war on terror, bombs are being dropped. But when they come here, they're black, but they're also refugees, which is its own dynamic. You're Muslim, you're poor, you're very poor. A lot of times what's happening is a lot of the homes are led by single mothers because of the way the system is set up. And then also we have a history of just being not being very complacent. I don't want to call it complacent, other people are being complacent, but we just have this history of being back home and not being like told what to do. And so we also have this tribal and clan type of relationship that, even though it has caused friction in other ways, allows us to become almost natural grassroots organizers. And to know who's who and where to connect and have these things. But I think with the larger African community, there is a lot of things being done. It's just maybe not being on TV, right? And we understand that we are pushed out of the larger immigration movement because it's anti-Black, largely anti-Black. And so you go there, you want to do this work, and then you hear this rhetoric that I was talking about, right? Or they want to tokenize you. And you don't feel welcome, or you don't want to do anything with that kind of problematic politics. I do see that obviously all these young people came out tonight, so people do care. I do see that the younger African folks are probably the most political and engaged. They're coming up at a time where Black Lives Matter was on the headlines and became politicized through that also. A lot of talks on social media. There's a lot of interpersonal engagement there. And they are people who you may not necessarily be like, oh, that's an African, but they are African people. So Baji's led by Opal, who's one of the Black Lives Matter co-founders. A lot of people in the movement, whether in New York or around the country, are Nigerian or Sierra Leonean or Sudanese or Somali, and it's just, also, you get immersed, and it's not a bad thing, a very good thing, but in the larger Black community, which is very diverse. So we talk about things as a Black issue, and I think that what that does is actually create a more cohesive, better strategy, and also very much in solidarity with these other communities. So I don't want us to be seen as we're disappearing, but we're getting more powerful and larger and being more in solidarity, which is a history we've had while we were on the continent with African Americans too, and other Black people around the world. So I definitely see it. Mm-hmm.
Actually, we have a huge audience, and what I'd really like to do is hear your voices as well, instead of just mine asking questions. We already have a hand up back there. Yes, sir.
It's very confusing when you use the term African and Black immigrant. I don't know what that means. And, I've been listening to you guys, I'm African American. I can trace my family back to 1790 in this country. And what I find with my African brothers and sisters that come over here is that a lot of them, when they come here, I think they mean well, but they start to congregate with themselves, and then they start to look at us like we're lazy and we don't want to do anything, when they really don't come here armed with the history of this country and the fact that we built this country. And then, it's like what you're talking about to me as an African American sounds like you're trying to make a gumbo without heat.
With that, I'm sorry?
Without heat.
Okay.
Like you're trying to cook something without heat. because the pot has already been going on, and now you stepping into it, and you're wondering why you're being, what's the word I'm looking for? Why you're being, not recognized. Well, I haven't been recognized since I've been here. And, you stepping into it, now you're asking these questions, but this is the same question that my people have been asking since we've been here.
Yeah,
So why are you acting like this is a new thing?
yeah,
And the stuff that's happening in your countries where you came from, the reason why you came here is because of oppression. And what we all need to do is get together and fight white supremacy, because that's what's causing all of this.
yeah,
Instead of just talking about this person's here and this person's from here. Well, if you here now.
yeah.
It ain't where you from, it's where you at. Basically, that's all I
Yeah.
gotta say.
No, I appreciate that. I agree 100%. I think what happens is it's not just white supremacy, which is definitely what we have to be targeting, but anti-blackness undergirds this whole global system that we're talking about, right? And none of us are here. Watson Shir is the Somali poet who did Beyonce's album, and she did slide. But she says that no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark, and I thought that was just like very beautiful. Also, you're stolen from home by the mouth of a shark. Also, I think what happens is that we all have internalized anti-blackness. We are taught, like we are colonized people, those of us coming from Africa and the Caribbean. We come here, especially if you're an economic immigrant, you've bought into this idea that America is a dream. Like a lot of our families would think that there's money coming out of the ATMs for free for everyone. Everybody has this opportunity. They want to come here. My own people are dying, like drowning in the seas, trying to come to Europe or the US or other places. And so America is a great propaganda machine. So for you to believe in the American dream, and then you come here and you see the reality of black people, there's a cognitive dissonance. If America is the land of dream, then why are black people the way they are? You cannot believe the truth. You cannot believe, if you have that American dream propaganda, if you're in the sunken place about this country, then you will have excuses about why black people, black Americans are in the position that they are in if you're not educated. A lot of us are, but those who aren't see something, and instead of facing that mourning, I was talking about that grief of really facing this monster that is America, you will say it's because people are lazy, because if you work hard enough, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, they will do something. So this is where that's coming from, this propaganda machine, and I completely agree with you. I do think that we are improving as a community, and it's up to us as Africans and other black immigrants to really educate our own selves about the history of this country. And this is why I was talking about this being a black issue, about incarceration, about slavery. This is something that's been happening for 400, 500 years. This is nothing new, and we don't want to, pretend that we're the first ones facing it. So we have a history to build on, which is also actually very much a gift. I also want to say that black people and African Americans, Africans and African Americans have been working together for many years, since the early 1900s, going back and forth. So this is also not a new project that we would be starting.
So I want to just build on that. I resonate with the key point, which is that we need to unite as a black diaspora, not just here in the United States, but the millions of folks who are in Latin America, as Yasmin said, Brazil, one of the largest receiving countries for the transatlantic slave trade, the billion Africans on the African continent. So I resonate with that, and I agree with that, and I think we situate ourselves as an organization and as a community within the black diaspora. I don't think that the way that we unite as a black diaspora is by erasing our culture and our heritage, right? We are Africans. I'm an Ethiopian, and I'm proud of that. And part of the way that you maintain your culture is by congregating with your own people. you just criticized us for wait. Listen. Yeah. All right. So, but when you say, "I see you congregating amongst yourselves," right? So I think that's how. Okay. How is that different? Right. Well, I think that's factually wrong. No, listen.
Okay, hey.
Listen.
Stop. Okay, sir,
Yeah.
sir, can we let him finish?
I understand. But I also work with West Africans, right? Like almost 100% of my membership here is West African, so I have some perspective on it. So listen. I think congregating and I think that it's actually a good thing when we preserve our culture, preserve our heritage, and that we build institutions. I also think that we need to build organizations like BAJI, which, as Yasmin said, is an African, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, and African-American organization, right? I think it's actually that when we are organized within ourselves, that we can engage as partners. We work extensively with Congressional Black Caucus, and Congressional Black Caucus has been the biggest voice, not only on black immigrant issues like temporary protected status, but also on foreign policy issues like the African continent.
Thank you.
Well, all right. So this is a multi-log rather than a dialogue,
Yeah.
brother. So anyway, I'm going to say I agree. We need to unite as a diaspora. I think there's change that needs to happen on both sides and education that needs to happen on both sides. So.
We have another question.
I feel like, going back I'm African and West African, specifically from Mali, going back to, I'm piggybacking from like everything you said and he said. And that has a lot to do with like the historical context before, back in the days when my parents were coming and black Americans were seeing them as less. Like that goes back to Liberia when, with the whole people going back to their, to find their roots and stuff, and they were going there to try to colonize something that you came from. Why are you going back to try to colonize that people and try to say we're creating this country? But you forget about the whole people that are there, like the Pepper Coast people and stuff, and stuff. And then now I feel like it's getting better with like, my African, it's growing up, like the black Americans were the ones calling me the African food scratcher. It was not the white people. When I went upstate to New York and I used to go to school there, that's when I faced racism. I was not facing racism. I didn't consider that as racism. I faced racism because when I would tell a white person I'm African American, they would be in the defense mode. But if I told them that I'm African, they're more open to me and more receiving to me. They want to know more about me. And that goes back to the whole whatever is going on today. And then when you this is the attitude you just were saying that we're trying to avoid. And I felt we were moving forward and becoming as one because when people, even with the whole Black Panther coming out, it's the African Americans that are more happy about it. They're this is something that's representing us finally. And then I feel we're moved past that of African congregating by themselves and black. I'm black. I'm just gonna sound African Americans congregating by themselves. But I feel going back to the historical context. Yes, when my parents first came to this country, they saw them as black because they were coming from Africa, and they did not know why they were coming. They came here obviously, and you had that parents at home, that told you you gotta be careful with black people. You could associate yourself with the Jamaicans and stuff. But when I grew up and I saw, I associate myself with the people I want to associate myself. That doesn't mean you could be brown, you could be yellow if you want. If I like you, I like you. But I think it's getting better. I just wanna, I hear you. No, but I hear you. No, I hear you. I just want to bring back what you said is the experiences of a lot of people. I think there was a miscommunication. I think the topic that the brother brought up, the issue the brother brought up is very valid and important. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you, and I agree with him. I think that you guys were just misunderstanding each other. He was talking about this idea. He's not asking us to leave our culture. No one can, we're not being asked to leave our culture, but sometimes when we come here, we want to distance ourselves. There's a difference. There's a difference between, I'm Somali, I'll always be Somali. You're African American, you're Ethiopian. There's a difference between us holding who we are, right, which is very important, and us being like, oh, the Ethiopian's right there, or the African American's right there, we're not gonna work together, or I'm gonna look down on you. That is what he's talking about. He's not asking us, I think as an African American, if I could speak for you, you could tell me if I'm wrong. As someone who's lived through a history of being stripped of his own culture, I don't think he would dare to ask us to be stripped. I do think that what the sister was saying speaks to a lot of hurt that we have among the larger Black diaspora, right? And again, it comes down to this internalized anti-Blackness. But you have to realize where this comes from, right? What do little kids know to be able to make fun of you? Where is this coming from? This propaganda, right? And so African people in America are being shown Africa as a place of booty scratchers, as a place of nothing but huts, and huts are great things. But like, this idea, because they're sustainable, they're green, all these stuff, but this idea that backwards barbaric, right? That's what they're being shown. And if you have a kid right now and you let them watch TV, that's what they'll be shown about Africa. And then Africans are being shown all these things about Black people. African American culture has been used, just like they have, and been taken as American culture and being sent around the world, but they still are not profiting off of it in any way. And what's been doing is minimizing and criminalizing them globally. So we have to understand where this is coming from. We have to also have like some kind of town halls where we can do some healing, because there is a lot of hurt, and there's a lot of hurt from on Black folks everywhere. Afro-Latinos will talk about how their Blackness, I don't know who that phone line is. African Americans will talk, Afro-Latinos, our Dominican brothers, sisters, our Honduran brothers, sisters who are Black will talk about how their Blackness is erased. So we can go into this and be a long conversation, but I do want to acknowledge that.
I just wanted to agree with both of you. So my parents are from Ghana. I was born in Brooklyn, first generation. And what I experienced from my father, I love him, but he did look down on Black people in America. He used to make comments about the way they wear their pants, the way they talk, all of that. He thought himself higher. Then you also have my uncle, who experienced a lot of racism from his Black neighbors, who did do the booty scratchers. I mean, honestly, it was just people of color, not even just Black people, but people saying really mean things that were African derogatory terms. And when it comes down to it also, because we feel safe, we do congregate within each other. I can tell you right now that if you ask me who makes the best jollof rice, there's gonna be a fight. Mm-hmm. Nigerians and Ghanaians, like, it's a battle.
Sierra Leoneans, please.
Pardon? Oops.
I'd rather we fight over rice than anything else.
No, but I mean, like, there's literally a fight. Like, my parents have made comments about Nigerian people, which are really mean. It's disgusting. Like, in my opinion, I think throughout history, white people, unfortunately, I have to say white people, have been white people have been pitting Black people against each other forever.
Yeah.
Who has the best slaves, Ghana or Nigeria? Who's stronger, Uganda or Sierra Leone? Whatever. They're literally pitting us against each other to separate us. If we came together, we would be unstoppable. But we here are just forming these horrible teams of like, who's light skin, who's dark skin, are you really Black? Like, where'd you come from? And it's like the most annoying thing in the world, when at the end of the day, we all have a different shade of the same color. We should all be coming together as one, working as, towards one common goal. That's just my opinion.
I want to, yeah.
Go ahead, and then I
Okay, great.
will recognize what move us.
Right, understood.
Back to immigrants.
Understood. And so I want to do one thing to just sort of complicate this narrative a little bit, right? The conflicts are real, right? We've seen them, sort of the tensions and the challenges today. 30% of the Black population of New York is immigrant, like meaning was actually born in another country. 20% of the growth of Black America has come from immigration, right? So yes, there are tensions, there are challenges, there are frictions. There are tensions and challenges and frictions in part because we live side by side. We live in the same neighborhoods. And as the generational process goes, people marry each other. People are friends with each other. People are integrated into an African-American identity over generations. You see it more clearly with Afro-Caribbeans who've been here longer than you see it with African immigrants from the African continent. But it's part of the process. The other thing is, I think we have to trace some of this back to the discourse of tribalism, right? It has always been part of the story of colonialism that the black people don't get along with each other, right? And so the reason that we're setting up our colonial administration is because this tribe is going to kill this tribe. You would hear white South Africans talking about it. Whoa, if we end apartheid, those Zulus and those Xhosa are just going to kill each other, right? And the history of tribes or ethnic groups in Africa, absolutely we war. Absolutely we fight with each other. We also trade with each other. We also depend on each other. People have different occupations that they take on. We marry each other. We form collective governments. That's part of the history of tribe. So for me, whether it's African, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, African-American, to me those are our tribes. But that doesn't mean that we aren't one people over and above our tribes.
Yeah.
So I brought in my African American music class today, and awesome, and they're here. And I'm thinking about some of the things that we will come to cover in class, and I was wondering if there are ways. We're talking about historical context and precedents, but I'm thinking about, for example, jazz. I'm thinking about hip hop. I'm thinking about also, from early jazz, but I'm also thinking about the jazz artists, African-American jazz artists who would be, traveling to Cuba, would have Cuban artists traveling up here to New York, obviously Miami. Lots of artistic collaboration going on. I would argue that we get something like jazz coming out of New Orleans, coming out of the Mississippi Delta, but New Orleans, because it's so multicultural. I think hip hop happens in the Bronx and Biggie Down Bronx and in New York City at large, in large part due not only to African Americans, but in large part due to immigrant black communities as well. So from very early to even more recent, we're seeing all of these contributions, we're seeing all of these collaborations and these shared moments, and of course it's not all perfect and not messy. We could talk about the Harlem Renaissance. So from your perspective as well, and since this conversation is being brought up, are there moments in history where we see that something is actually functional and not dysfunctional as these, which I think are very real and very true, and we're bringing up these moments of dysfunction and conflict, yes, between African Americans, Africans, Caribbean, but we also have very much histories because then jazz would not happen, hip hop would not happen. So where do you think or know in terms of this historical context where we have seen something functioning? Because things have come out of close interaction and community with these diasporic situations.
So the first thing that comes to my mind, and I had touched on briefly, was pre-civil rights era in the U.S. who couldn't have been born without the travel of various African activists and revolutionaries and scholars with their with various African Americans in the U.S. Sorry, I got distracted. So no, it's fine. So like in the 30s, 40s, early 50s, there was large travel between the continent and the Americas. Some of our greatest African revolutionaries studied at Howard and HBCUs, right? Like, and that kind of thinking and that kind of sharing in the dorm rooms, like literally revolution coming out of that, right? We have Haiti being the first free black independent nation in the world. And they kicked France's ass, right? They kicked their ass. To this day, Haiti is still being punished for it because not just symbolic, but how powerful that was an illustration, and that inspired different revolutions throughout the African diaspora. Literature and music and clothes and food, and Black people have always been this. We're human beings. Even if they don't see us as such, we are human beings. And there's always be friction. There will always be friction, but through heat cooks a lot of good things. And so there is to this day But that is one of the biggest things, this idea of like this African revolutions on the continent and the American civil rights era wouldn't have happened if we weren't working together.
Yeah, and to speak specifically to the music and culture piece that you raised, I think jazz is such an amazing illustration of the cyclical influence, right? Because, you know, you have jazz that's rooted in African polyrhythms and, you know, this legacy, you know, brought from the continent. And then being created and transformed into this whole new thing in the crucible of the African American experience. And then being re-imported to the African continent. You know, I'm from Ethiopia, and Ethio jazz and Ethio funk, you know, the great artists of the 60s and the 70s, you know, they were being influenced by, you know, by jazz, but also by James Brown and Aretha Franklin, you know, High Life, Afrobeat, all of those, you know, and then that gets re-imported. And so to me, that's a symbol of the way that, you know, culture transcends in some ways and unites, and it is sort of a solvent that connects us.
The gentleman over here.
Hi, my name is Kason, and I'm a Black Studies student. And I have comments, and then I have a question about DACA. The first thing is, I think the idea about education, like right now we're sitting in an institution, but many of us are not receiving the education that we would necessarily need to be holistic individuals. And so that's why I think that creating your own syllabus, like outside of college, is an important thing, so you can learn things on your own pace and with your own interests. But with that, like I did a study abroad in Accra, Ghana for a little while, and like just the interaction with people there, they were my age, older, all kinds, and like speaking to them, they were more Americanized than I was. I was really surprised. I was like, how do you know about this? But they really knew about the good parts of America. So when I told them that we had poverty, we had ghettos, like this is something that happens, like police brutality, I had to show them newspaper clippings for them to believe me. I was like, this is serious? But then I started asking them about African history, like before colonial times, and they really didn't even know about that. I didn't know about it either, but it's just something that I assumed that it would be well known that people understood the history. But the propaganda machine that the United States is and other colonial countries, it's been forced on us in the United States, but also in other countries, and it has to be understood because it's a struggle that's connected in many ways, and we always want to divide it, like, oh, I'm from this ethnic group, I'm from this country. Like, if you just remove the boundaries, it's much more important to understand on a more human level. But to the question of DACA, I wanted to ask, do any of the recipients have a risk when they're applying for DACA? And like, because they're giving their information out, they're telling people about their situation and about their families, so I wanted to know what kind of issues they would have by applying.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit, and it's an issue that affects DACA, but also programs like temporary protected status or almost anything, right? Asylum, we were talking about the, you know, people being arrested when they go to their asylum application. So prior to this administration, there was kind of a bright line that they were not going to use, that unless somebody had like an order of removal, that they had some, you know, although one of the big exceptions was if people had been arrested, you know, or convicted of a crime, rather, that people were not, that the government was not going to use information that had been used to apply for an immigration benefit as like an enforcement targeting list, right? Before this administration, I could have said that that was the policy, and we would encourage people, you know, it's case by case, right? We would sit down and talk with people and make sure that you know, they hadn't committed some kind of fraud that was going to put them at greater risk or things like that. But in general, that was sort of a bright line that existed. It doesn't exist in this administration. We have seen you know, information that people are using to adjust their status used to target people. That said, the biggest thing preventing mass deportation is not any humanity on the part of this administration. It is simply the logistical and financial and political cost of rounding up 12 million people. And they pick soft targets for the most part, right? They pick people, they go after people with criminal convictions because they see them as soft targets, as people who are more vulnerable to removal. They go after people who are newly arrived for the same reasons. So practically, they're probably not going to start taking the DACA list and going down the list and saying, okay, that's who we're putting into deportation proceedings. They will go after people who are easier for them to remove. So in most cases, attorneys are still counseling people, if you qualify for this benefit, because how important it is, frankly, to protect yourself from deportation, as well as work authorization, a driver's license, financial aid, limited financial aid, it's better for you to apply. But it really is something that an individual needs to talk with a lawyer about and get into the details of their own case.
There was a hand up.
Okay, so my name is Luan, part of the New York City Revolution Club, and I guess I'd like to start off by saying, I think it's really important that everyone on the stage actually spoke to the escalation that this is. The Trump, Pence, Jeff said, this whole regime, it's fascist. What they're doing, the different moves that they're actually advancing on now, look at what they're doing. They're taking immigrants' rights leaders. We're talking about Ravidath Ragbir, Mauro Mora, Villalpando, and others, and this strikes fear into the communities. And not just that, but it's actually gearing up and paving the road for genocide. So that begs the question, well, what do we do? And I want to first, kind of say, throughout history, it's been shown that without mass protest, there hasn't been any kind of real change. And I think that the most important thing for people to be engaging right now is this film. It's a film and talk by Bob Avakian entitled "The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go. In the Name of Humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. A better world is possible." And, this is not only, is this an escalation, but it does tie into, well, what is the deep-seated history, of this country, and even going deeper with the roots of capitalism. We're talking about in all these different, countries all over this world. So I just have a question. Well, what do you think, considering the point about, no change, no true change has ever come without mass protests in the streets. What do you think that is needed in regards to this escalation? What should we do?
I know I'm moderating, but the one comment that I will make is that, we have examples here of what people are doing, connecting, collaborating, supporting each other, and I think that's really one important way that we're seeing modeled for us right here. So I don't know if you want to add.
I appreciate you for that. I think there needs to be, it is happening, but an increased mass politicization of the people, right? Because no one is born knowing all these things, and you probably learned it through your own journey. I think but it's difficult because I keep bringing up this mourning process because I went through it, right? It's a very difficult one when you're realizing, and maybe you have already known, but understanding the system, I do think that there is a miseducation, intentional miseducation that's happening. But mass mobilization and organizing are two different but very important things that need to work together. What happens is that you get mass numbers of people out in the streets, like we had for the ban, and they go home. And so what Amaha was talking about, turning the clients into members, into organizing, that's what Baju does. We organize, and it's gritty, and it's not pretty, and it's hard work, and it's not glamorous, but it's work that's needed, and it's following a history of great work in the United States and the larger Black diaspora. But I do believe that grassroots organizing is where it needs to happen, and mass politicization of the people.
I agree with what both of you sisters said, and I would just add one thing. Mass mobilization, sort of leadership development, but then we also need to do community defense, right? Like we can't just say, I guess it's okay that 90 Somalis got put onto a plane, and flown off. I guess it's okay that 45 Gambians were all just deported, right? Like whether, and it needs to be more than just sort of legal defense, although legal defense is part of it. The example of Ravi Ragbir and New Sanctuary and the way that community, helped save him, or at least so far he has a stay of deportation, by rallying outside of ICE when they were, here, when he was there for his check-in interview. To me, we need to wrap our arms around our community members who are at risk in that same way.
Yeah, and I just want to say, definitely defense, and there's all these things that you probably shouldn't be talking about in an open public space like this, because you don't talk about the revolution openly all the time. But Baji does, along with a lot of other organizations, does mass bailouts. And so this is just one small, and it's great because it helps politicize people, it's mobilizing, it's also organizing, and it has a tangible effect on people. And so Baji is one of the few that does bailouts of immigrant detention, which their bails tend to be much higher than criminal bails, but and there's going to be mass bailouts happening for Black mothers coming up. We did that for Black fathers, but we're doing it on constantly. So
Just to give voices that we haven't heard some space, you had your hand up.
I got a question. I was asking if
Get to
DACA
it.
is only for college students. I never heard of it before.
I can speak to that. So DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So it was a program that was enacted by the Obama administration that essentially it was enacted in response to pressure for the DREAM Act, which was actually much more comprehensive and would have given people green cards, right? Would have actually given people a path to becoming permanent residents and citizens. The president can't do that on his own authority, and the Republican Congress refused to go along with that. And so what he could do within his executive authority is essentially give people a temporary status. And he only did this because of mass protest, right? Dreamers, undocumented youth. It's not, I want to be clear, it's not just the sort of narrative appeal of the Dreamer story. People sat in on Obama campaign offices in the 2002 election, right? They shut those offices down. They were backed up by a story that had a lot of appeal, but there was also a lot of militant action, people in the streets saying undocumented, unashamed, unafraid. And so under pressure, what they did was do this DACA status, which is essentially a temporary immigration status. It lasts like 2 years. People have some measure of protection against deportation, and they have work authorization and can get Social Security numbers and get things like driver's licenses. It only applies to people who came to the U.S. when they were under 16 years of age. And I think, the year has changed, but at the time that it was passed, I think they had to be under 31, 32. I'm not going to remember, but they were, it was only people within a certain age band. So it is one form of immigration relief. There's actually a lot of people out there in the community who've never talked to a real immigration lawyer. We have a lot of, in our communities, like shady folks passing themselves off as lawyers who will take thousands of dollars from people and give them bad legal advice. And so sometimes we find, people may qualify for immigration relief that they don't know about. So one of the things that we can do on the subject of community defense is there is now a ton of immigration legal resources in New York City. We do, like I said, 300 cases a year, right out of our offices right here on 127th and Lenox. If you've got aunties, uncles, family who have not gotten good legal advice, have them come, make an appointment. Maybe it's like a checkup, the doctor tells them nothing's changed, but at least let them have that. So I think that's a very important thing we can do to defend our communities.
Okay, the lady with the mic.
Hi guys, so I have a comment briefly and then I have a question. So Yasmin, when you spoke about I don't know, I think you can see
Sorry,
me.
who's talking?
Hi, we're here. Hi.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. So when you talked about going through the stages of grief, I really felt that because I think when I was in high school, I kind of fed into the whole, I guess, neoliberal paradigm. And I really believe
Yeah,
this
girl.
is like land of the free, you know. My parents came here as immigrants, so I really believe the whole American dream narrative. It wasn't until I got to college where I really had to unlearn basically everything I learned from pre-K to high school. And it was very difficult at first because I took a African politics class, and that's when the professor, I thought he was being very provocative. I was like, what am I hearing? But after, you know, reading the books that were assigned and the Pan-African literature, the Black liberation articles and all that, I really got to understand where he was coming from, and that's where I kind of began on this journey towards kind of liberating myself and also using my power, my voice to help liberate others. And also when you spoke about pitting the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, I think a lot of times there's this narrative of the exceptional migrant, and it has so many iterations. For example, there's the refugee who's suffered and is very deserving of this rescue. But then there are the economic migrants who don't really have visible, tangible suffering, even though a lot of times you're poor for a lot of the same reasons. But because foreign policy sort of disregards that, then we're caught in those two dichotomies. And then when we come here, is your DACA recipient, or for example, your mom or your dad, like you said, they're more likely to have ICE agents come to their door. So I just want to comment on that, and I agree with a lot of what you guys just said. And I have a quick question for Amha. So you spoke about your organization kind of advocating for more language access for African immigrants, specifically in Arabic and French. I just want to comment, what about for the African immigrants, for example, my parents, who are Gambian, so we don't speak French or Arabic. It's mostly English, but how about those who tend to be illiterate in English? What are the options to kind of broaden the language access to indigenous West African languages?
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, so French and Arabic, to be clear, were something of a compromise, right? Like we have a lot of, Ivorian, Senegalese, Malian, Guinean, et cetera, immigrants who, for them, in most cases, they speak an African language, but then they're used to using French as a way to communicate outside their ethnic group, or after a certain age, they started to take French. And even Arabic, what we find, it's not a huge proportion of the community, but if folks have had a religious education, right, then they may have learned some Arabic, and they may be more comfortable in Arabic, even if they're not from a country like, say, Sudan, where they're native Arabic speakers. So you have language access rights when you go to, again, HRA or Harlem Hospital or what have you, and that aren't limited to those 10 languages, that including French and Arabic. We wanted to get those 10 languages because a lot of that is about written communication. So when you get a notice from about your housing rights, the languages that it's translated are on the back. Those are going to be in those top 10 languages. But when you go into the office, somebody should be finding out what language you speak, whether it's Wolof or Soninke or Fulani or Madigo or Oromifa or Amharic or whatever language you speak, and getting you help in that language. Usually, unfortunately, that's going to mean a language line, like they're going to put somebody on the phone. But it should never be the case that a mom is going with her kid to the parent-teacher conference, and the child is translating for the, here's all the things the ways that your kid is messed up in school, right? Or, the mom is going, the mom and the kid are going to the OBGYN appointment, and, they're talking about their, women's health issues, and the child is translating. But that's what happens. Right? So we need to address that issue in addition to these kind of big policy issues. The way that we're doing that is we're working a lot with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. We're trying to target certain high-use agencies and departments. So HRA is one, Health and Hospitals is another, and Department of Ed is a third. And a lot of times things can be solved by hiring a small number of bilingual, bicultural navigators in key locations, right? So if we could get some folks, I mean, it's like how many, Mandingo speakers are using Harlem Hospital? A lot, If we could get some folks in those key locations, that would actually go a long way. And then, we're also pushing people to do targeted outreach and surveys in neighborhoods where we have a high density of a particular language, even if it's not one of those top 10 languages. So a lot of work to do, and a lot of it is really nitty-gritty implementation as opposed to like big policy changes.
Gentleman over there, had your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to, first of all, communities.
Yeah, I think I had mentioned it before, so I'm just going to be brief about it. But I don't know if you came in a little later. No, did you catch what I was saying earlier? So I won't go too much into it because we don't have much time. But very much, this is America. This is the roaches that have been under the table for a long time, and you're picking up the table. That's what's happening, and they're scattering across the floor. They've been here. I'm from Georgia. I grew up in the Deep South. They're much more honest down there. I kind of miss them sometimes. Like, and then it's living up here. I lived in D.C. and then I live here now. Sometimes you don't know where you stand. Like, there's something about living in the South where it's safer in some ways. You know where to look. We were talking about, you from North Carolina. My Southern accent is about to come out now. But like, there's a target on your back. I think the difference is you're the psychologist, but there's a psychological difference for me personally of turning on TV and hearing it over and over and over again. This reality, but I do acknowledge that it has railed up this base. But before Trump, we talk, as a Muslim, we're talking about the Islamophobia and this war on terror, which is very much a black issue also. Because you look back at Malcolm and you look back at COINTELPRO, this is the targeting of Muslim folks. What was happening is that, I lost my train of thought. So the difference though is that he's definitely giving oxygen to what's been happening, and that white male commit the most terrorist attacks in this country, right? And so these violent racist organizations, not just the KKK, but all these other organizations have been building for a very long time under Obama because Obama was president. But they were there before him too. So it's just a growing fire that's been happening. But this is just classic America. This is very much classical America. We're just in a new era. It is definitely scary. It is terrifying. But Black Lives Matter, immigration issues, the whole Islamophobia, we're right here. Like, these are issues that our communities are definitely battling. And I do think that one of the ways of defense is love. And I don't mean the shallow kind of way. I mean like real gritty, nitty love, like being there for each other, Sunday dinners, each other's house, like people's mental health is really like being exacerbated at a time like this, and being there for each other and finding joy, right? And not just focusing on the negative issues that we're dealing with, but also focusing on the love and the joy and the art and the music. I think that's definitely an important part of like Black liberation and Black defense. It has to be, because we're not just trying to survive, we're trying to live and flourish. So.
We have a question.
Okay.
Who has the mic?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chamna. I'm from Cameroon. And I'm a researcher here at the City College of New York. Actually, I'm just bringing a comment. What we should know is that if we don't get African American and African together as one community, we would never go anywhere. Believe me or not. I'm saying this because since I'm here, I noticed that when something is just concerning African, some Black Americans sometimes don't get concerned, and vice versa.
And I'm the founder of Résulam. Résulam is Résurrection des langues maternelles. That means we are there to let African American to know that they are African. We remind that every day through history, through languages. As she was mentioning, we developed many applications to learn typical native African languages. And we may be able to work with you guys because I'm sure many people are deprived from their culture. And if you don't have history, the same culture with someone, you won't feel like he's really your brother. You will say, oh yes, he's my brother, but you don't have anything in common. You don't feel like you have something in common. And if you don't have something in common, you will just know, yes, he's my brother, but you don't feel it. You don't really feel it. So I'm just saying that if people here try to learn typical African languages or African culture, that will help also to know that we are one and we are not many people, as people say, just Black American or African American. I don't like those terms because we are all African. And through our history and our languages, we are able to get together to form a massive defensive community. So this is one comment I just wanted to bring. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think the sister
I
in the
see,
back.
okay, this gentleman, and then we'll get to you.
Do I have to stand or?
You do whatever you want. You feel comfortable.
I realize there's a lot of talk about this thing about the different groups and people congregating with each other. And it's even cliques in high school how people tend to group themselves to like people with commonalities and what's, you know, and you guys having some kind of commonality in some way and kind of understanding each other, like a common understanding. But the people that are saying that, you notice, are the older generation. But there's no speak for people like me in their early 20s and my sister here that was trying to make the point that things changed, right? Because when I first came here, because I'm from Jamaica, I came here when I was 8, and you know, I spoke Jamaican patois, and I was mocked for it. You know, people would like laugh every time I try to say something. I didn't even want to like participate in class because of that mockery of, but not to get back to the negative, to what everyone is saying, the reason why I said I wanted to say something was because we don't, right now, everyone's saying, oh, this is bad, everybody's divided, but we're not noticing the unity that we see now today. Women and in general, beauty, like how beauty is perceived has changed. In the past, you know, being dreadlocks and having, you used to be called dirty and that sort. Black men, women are embracing their own beauty. Not to say that if you want to wear wigs or that sort, however you want to, you know, decorate yourself, that's fine. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's a change. People, basically you having an accent now is looked as more being a good thing. People are perceiving it better. People want to know more about your culture. And with these new DNA testing with like Ancestor DNA, a lot of my generation now are taking these tests and trying to reconnect and know where, even being Caribbean American, knowing what region of Africa, you know, that your ancestors came from, and trying to embrace that and downloading those apps, as he said. Yes, I have one to learn Igbo, and basically, the point I'm trying to make is that let's not perceive on the negative. Let's look and admire where we came from, because as you said, the 30s, you said 30s, 40s, 60s, and 70s.
30s, 40s,
60s, I would say up to the 60s. There was the black communities, we know about Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 30s that was bombed. And these great, how we used, there was basically black skills, and our communities were strong and growing. and we notice there's something happened.
Jamaica was very important at that
Yeah,
time, too.
I know, with Marcus
Yeah,
Garvey and even going forward with that. But what I'm trying to say is we know what happened after the 60s, 70s. We know there was a cocaine epidemic that happened and the mass incarceration of black males, the crime bill under Clinton. And that's what kind of destroyed our communities. That's what kind of shift us away. We lost our leaders, right? Into the late, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, and so forth. We lost our leaders. We lost our individuals that gave us direction, and our communities were decimated with crime. Our males were taken away, and that's what a lot of the problems we're facing now is actually from that era. But it's really tremendously changing. You're making organizations to help with what's happened with the criminal justice system. We are fully aware of like 13th Amendment and all of that sorts, and basically the cheap labor that comes from the prison industrial complex. We're aware of it. We're more aware of it. People are self-educating ourselves, young people our age, and that's what we need to celebrate. And as you said, defending each other, when these radicals or so forth, and try to, when the progress is starting to be dismantled and the leadership is taken out, that's what we should really try to safeguard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lady back there in the yellow, and then she was waiting, and then we'll come to you. The lady in the yellow, yeah.
Can you
For
speak?
louder.
Yeah, you might need the mic.
No.
There you go.
Hold
there
on.
you go.
Can you give her the mic? Because there's people who are hard of hearing sometimes who can't use.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, thank you. I just want to say thank you all for speaking. Thank you, Black Studies Department. This was really amazing, and thank you everyone for contributing to the dialogue. I just wanted to know very simply, even though this is a really complex issue, what are like 3 to 5 action steps that people who are not, they're not legal aid, they're just people who want to help, beyond providing love and support and listening, what's the way that we can mobilize, or what is the follow-up point that you suggest that we go to, or what's the next step after this?
Well, I'm going to give one very immediate one. I mentioned earlier Chuck Schumer, Senate, the Democratic minority leader in the Senate. Like I said, even though he was one of the authors of the diversity visa program, which admits something like 20,000 Africans every year, he seems fine with selling it off for nothing, or maybe for some concessions around DACA. That debate is happening right now, right? Like they're responding to a Republican proposal right now. And if you're in New York and you're a voter, he is your senator, right? And actually, even if you're not a voter, what the heck, you're still his constituent, right? He has to represent everyone in the district. So you could leave here and you could call the senator's office. We're actually planning to put out an action alert tomorrow asking people to do this and say, don't dismantle the diversity visa program. Don't let the diversity visa program be destroyed. And if he starts hearing from people on diversity visa the same way he's heard from people on DACA, he's going to sit up and pay attention. So you can do that. You can tweet at him. They pay attention to what's happening on Twitter. And then I'll say the last thing for my organization. There are rallies, there are actions, there are public events that are happening. We talked about defending our folks when people are facing deportation or when these hateful policy attacks come down. The way that you can get on that is you can take out your smartphone and you can, or a dumb phone too. I mean, you can do whatever phone, and text to the following number. 347 767 4425. I'll say that one more time. 347 767 4425. And you can type the word, actually I think almost anything you type is going to work. We tell people to type refuge, REFUGE. And that'll just get you on our action alert list. And so you'll get either an email or a text when we're doing public events. So that's a concrete action step.
Can I ask, do either of your organizations take on volunteers?
Absolutely, we work with volunteers. We've sometimes worked with student interns. We haven't worked with Black Studies, although we'd be more than open to, but we mostly work with master's level folks. But if folks are interested in outreach or, those kinds of things. Again, we're an organization of immigrants from Africa and their families. Our meetings happen here once a month. Good heavens, once a week, it would kill me. On 127th and Lenox, so that's another way to get involved.
Yasmin, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'll do my usual spiel about Baji. We have an organizing committee. We do the bailouts, there are events, but I really believe in starting at home. And seeing where the need is in your own family, honestly, having these conversations. I started talking to my dad. I went back home to Atlanta, and we had a conversation about being a prison abolitionist. And I was talking to my mom about trauma associated with migration issues. And I've been starting to do work in my own community, my own family around mental health. That's where I can best fit in at that moment there, especially because I don't live with them. But there is things like, what's it called? In terms of immigration, I forgot what they're called, but there's these organizations. Ravi is part of the Sanctuary Coalition, and what they do is you go with someone when they have to check in, like Ravi had a check-in, but they took him at the accompaniment. That's something, if you have time, especially a lot of college students who have like more of an erratic schedule than most people, a more flexible schedule, you can go accompany somebody to a detention check-in and make sure they come out. That's a big deal, right? There's depending on your safety, right? We got to think about that. People going to prisons where Black folks, Black Americans, and Black immigrants very much are in, or detention centers. There are, community organizations that you can work with in your own community, so you don't have to do a long, but I really believe in starting at home and seeing what is the need here, because a lot of times we think about the larger issues. That is important. Everybody has their own lane. Everybody has what they're good at, right? And so you could be a musician and really do that. And so whatever you're good at, your art, whatever your passion is, figuring out and where to give that. And even in people's own colleges, people are hungry. I'm sure people are hungry in this school. I'm sure people are hungry in this school.
So we're going to take 3 last questions. We had 3 people up. You've been waiting very patiently.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I love the conversation that millennials have, and I think that we always be a part of the conversation. It shouldn't just be African American, Caribbean, because I'm Caribbean. I'm from Barbados. So this is a conversation that needs to be had across the board, and we need to unify. Stop being so passive and unify. Do something about it.
Hit the mic.
Oh, so my question was, how can orgs, because we've talked about how people individually can plug in to do work, but I'm one of the co-leads for a Black organization. I was wondering, how can we plug in? We doing immigration work, so like, how can we plug in with y'all?
Which work are you talking about?
UBN, like we plugged in already. This is more for.
Say the name of the organization.
He's talking about UndocuBlack.
Oh, UndocuBlack.
He works with UndocuBlack
together.
too.
We're working on the federal policy stuff a lot today. Locally, one thing that we could do, we convene a coalition called City of Refuge, which is specifically challenging attacks on humanitarian immigration policies, refugee, asylum, and TPS. It's actually, our organizer went off to law school, so we haven't been actively meeting, but that's going to be reconvening. We would love to have, and it's got a lot of Black-led organizations, MBL and Million Hoodies and a lot of folks, and we're trying to actually foreground the ways that humanitarian immigration, refugee issues are Black issues and disproportionately affect Black immigrants and refugees. So we would love to have UndocuBlack participation in that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Omaha met at UndocuBlack, but I'm managing New York BIN, so let's talk. And UndocuBlack, if you guys don't know, my partner is one of the co-founders, but they're young Black undocumented people, both with DACA and without DACA, who started UndocuBlack because of the issues we were talking about. They did something because the narrative is very anti-Black and excludes Black folks. So they're Caribbean and African folks, young people.
I feel like it's so sad that we're living in this period of time in a society that's supposed to people just spreading that whole deal of fake news and people just choosing to believe what they want to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think your 2 points are very interconnected, and I think part of the solution is going to the institutions that people know and trust, right? The bulk of our people who come to us as clients, it's because we went to their mosque, their church, or their association, and we did a Know Your Rights presentation there. So I think if people are connected to institutions like that, inviting us to come in, do a Know Your Rights, and then we sign people up, and if they need immigration legal services, then they come, and it's free to them. We're funded by the city and by private foundations. So I think that's one thing we can do is get those resources in people's hands. And I'll just say, we did the citizenship for my own auntie, and she would say, well, so-and-so did such and such, and she got it done like this quickly. And I was like, auntie, I'm an immigration lawyer, and you're, I know, and it's like, but sometimes it's trust is a crazy thing, right? And sometimes people trust things that come through trusted sources and trusted networks, which is why we need to kind of go to those trusted sources and networks and be there and give people, and crowd out the bad information. It's the same thing with the panic around raids, right? Like, raids are real, right? Raids are happening, arrests are happening. A lot of what gets reported as a raid, such and such is happening at Staten Island Ferry or in the dollar vans in Brooklyn or whatever, sometimes they are not what people think they are. And actually, we're trying to tell people that driving panic is part of how this, sort of nativist, white supremacist agenda works, right? They want people to be scared and at home. So we need to put out good information and crowd out bad information.
We're going to take one last question, and then we're going to...
I'm glad I came here today. Like, when I was coming in, I was like, why is the professor making us come here?
Oh, you guys were forced to come. Now we know.
So you say thank you. Last comment, please.
All right, I will come talk.
I'm just doing this so that we can leave some time if people want to have some individual discussions up here. But very last and not least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
I'm going to...
Strong note to finish on. I agree with you.
And I'm going to...
No.
And I'm going to give...
Let me, yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for that reminder. We're finishing. Thank you for that reminder, brother. I think that's a perfect way to kind of perfect energy and a reminder to close off that we're here not just to maintain TPS or DACA or get naturalization, that we're here for liberation work. And I was at a organizing meeting recently, and they were talking about the Muslim ban, and I was like, if all this immigration stuff went away today and we had no immigration problems, will we continue doing this work? What would our goal be? And I think that's just a reminder to renew our intention that citizenship, even if we were granted on paper, there's black people here who've gotten citizenship that do not have full citizenship, right? And so what are we gonna be getting, and what are we fighting for, and how we are all in this together? So remember that at the end of the day that it's not about TPS or whatever is being debated on the Senate floor, that we're looking for full liberation for our people all over the world and here. So thank you.
Okay. So on behalf of Black Studies Program, our panelists, I'd like to thank all of you for I'd like to thank all of you for a really rich multi-log, and my hope is that it doesn't just stop here, that it continues. Thank you, and have a good night. Thank you guys. You guys are phenomenal.